Another year in the first round for the Minnesota Timberwolves, another year with a play-in win, but another year with a first-round exit. We're joined here by a Timberwolves fan today, and he'll be sure to give his shots. But ultimately, the Timberwolves have been better over the last couple of years, but haven't quite been able to get over the hump, even with their big splash they made last offseason to acquire Rudy Gobert. Where they move now, moving forward with Rudy and Cat still in town, with Cat being in trade rumors and Anthony Edwards and McDaniels being extension eligible this offseason, there's going to be a lot of money thrown around and a lot of big decisions to be made in Minnesota this offseason. And we're going to talk with the man from Minnesota himself here first, and Jacob, to get his thoughts on the man who was proclaimed Karl-Anthony Towns might just be the best player in the league.
That's a tough title. I did say that at one point. It's a tough situation Minnesota's currently in right now. I mean, there's a lot of debates going on whether or not Cat should be traded or not, and I think they're very valid, questions. I think we see it every offseason as a Minnesota fan. I mean, even fans around the NBA, you see the articles every single offseason about how Cat might be traded. I think 99.9% of the time, they're just kind of hearsay type stuff like that. But now I think it's getting a little bit realer. We're seeing more reports now where we might actually trade him for a higher pick in the draft. We saw that they're listening to all offers for Cat, especially surrounding like the top 5 picks in the draft. So I don't know what they're going to do with Cat, but I think overall, this team might just run it back. I don't necessarily agree with that move, but I think that's the most likely option at this point.
Yeah. I don't know. I just think like what they've already committed last year, you gave up so many picks. You gave up a few valuable players that proved to be valuable in not just the postseason, but throughout the course of this season, all for Rudy Gobert. I don't think there's any possible way they could trade Rudy Gobert like this offseason, which I know some people are saying like, bro, you just got Gobert, but he's not working out. You got to make a move. I think if anything, like if they were to trade one of those two guys, they probably are going to trade your buddy Cat, just because one, I think he does have more value. He's a little younger. He's a better player, of the two. But at the same time, he's kind of been there for a long time, and it seems like the face of this team moving forward is going to be Anthony Edwards. And just having like the 2-center logjam, I think the benefit with having Gobert this season is this could be a redemption year for him to like prove his worth a little bit. Because I mean, even especially with him being in Utah last year, and I feel like this guy, Drew, they had him kind of held to the same standard as a rookie replacement of him in Utah and Walker Kessler. And on a lot of metrics, Walker Kessler was having a better season than Rudy Gobert. So I think right now, like the narrative around the league is that this guy is not the same player. And maybe next year he can kind of like back himself up. He can improve his play a little bit. But I think it's more than likely going to work better if he's kind of the only primary center on the team. And I know Cat missed a lot of the year, but at the same time, even when he did play, they really didn't look that great. So I would at least run it back with Rudy Gobert this season. If they wanted to bring both of them back next year and see how it works, I mean, that's totally fine. They are committed a lot of money over the next at least probably 3 years, because I feel like by 2025, 2026, Gobert is not going to be worth $46 million, so he's probably going to take that player option. And as for Cat, like he still has potentially 2 more years after that. But I mean, in terms of Anthony Edwards, you got to extend him this offseason. As for Mike Conley, he's also getting the bag next season. It's not like fully guaranteed, but I felt like personally, like he was really productive for you guys. I wouldn't say maybe worth 24, 25 million necessarily, but I thought he was pretty productive for you guys. That maybe at least for next season, like he could still contribute for you guys. I don't see like a major drop off there. But as I'm looking at the rest of this team, a lot of these other guys on the team, most of them aren't on contract past next year, other than like Wendell Moore maybe. I think of the rest of those guys, there's 2 major players you need to bring back. Actually, I guess potentially 3, but one of them isn't like a free agent necessarily this offseason. But the 2 that are going to be free agents that I think you need to bring back are Nickeil Alexander-Walker, who's a restricted free agent, and Naz Reid, who's unrestricted. And I think, you extend Jaden McDaniels. Those are probably like the key players. And as for like the rest of this team, though, like I know Jordan McLaughlin has been there for a while, but I feel like he's probably run his course. I think Jalen Noel, at this point, I don't know how much longer we can count on him. I know he's still young, but I just don't know if this is like quite the team for him. And a lot of these other guys just haven't really made their mark on the team. I guess like Kyle Anderson as well, but we got to see if there's like an actual like riff there with Rudy Gobert. I don't think it really was. I think the media kind of blew it out of proportion. But if that is something, then maybe they want to consider that as well. Other than that, though, I think pretty much the only other player that's, essential for this team this year was Taurean Prince, who he had some big moments as well. But they're going to have to decide whether to bring him back, I guess, the year after that. But that's not a decision they need to make right now. I think primarily extend Ant. If they want to decide between Gobert and Cat, I would personally rather decide with Gobert to stay right now, so you can up his value at least and maybe get him closer back to that value he was once at. So if you do trade him eventually, he has higher value. And then as for guys like Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Naz Reid, Jaden McDaniels, try to lock them up. I fear Naz Reid is probably the likeliest to find a new home. But if they can do that, I mean, there's still a solid – they got a lot of solid young players on the team other than like Mike Conley really. And I mean, Gobert's only like 30. So, hey, I think they could be in a position to bounce back next season because we didn't see them all at full strength as much. So there's potential there.
First thing first, man. I know we bashed JELSON a lot about the Minnesota Timberwolves, how they're the worst organization and the worst team, which, the numbers back it up. But I do want to say, though, I give them credit. This team, when we're just talking about playoffs, right? They've been in the playoffs the last 2 seasons, right? And that's an accomplishment because before the 2021-2020 season, they haven't made it since 2018. So you're obviously seeing some good stuff over there with the Minnesota Timberwolves. They got a franchise guy in Anthony Edwards who been a lot of crazy stuff going on Twitter, comparing him and Shea together or who's better or whatnot. I personally just like both, but we know how that engagement gets. Anyways, but I think it's clear they got to let go of Cat. I mean, Rudy Gobert is 14-13 with the Timberwolves with Karl-Anthony Towns in his career. I'm not sure if that's updated. I don't know if JELSON knows for sure. But they're – what's up?
No, I'm not 100% sure if it's updated or not. Yeah, go ahead.
Got you. But either way, the record wasn't good when he was on the court. And then I just seen this statistic that came out. In 5 playoff games, then 119 minutes on the court together, Towns and Gobert had an offensive rating of 114 and a defensive rating of 122. And that just tells you a lot right there. They just can't work together. And so it's always going to come out of trade who and this and that. That's mainly what's going to be talked about this whole episode. But what the Minnesota Timbers are going to look at is, well, Cat was injured half the season. He only played about 20 games, and they're going to be like, well, let's see if – or close to 30, they're going to be like, well, let's see what we can get Cat out of a full season with Rudy Gobert and Nate Edwards. I think they do keep their team somewhat par, like their main core together. And then maybe during the trade deadline, depending on where they're at the moment in the Western Conference, maybe they can make some moves. Maybe they kind of stay still. But I feel like they're confident with the team. I actually like the roster that we got. And I do think the Denver Nuggets do win that series still. But Jaden McDaniels and Naz Reid were huge losses. And those are injuries that, Jaden McDaniels affected the team and himself by just acting foolish. And then Naz Reid was just an injury, right? Like I said, Denver still wins the series, but I honestly think it makes it tougher for them. But my question is, too, and I think everybody's seen this on live television. We've seen this with Jordan Poole and Draymond Green. Kyle Anderson and Rudy Gobert had problems during a live television game, and he threw a punch. It was a weak punch, too. Boom. And then Kyle Anderson, calling him out on his name, being very disrespectful. Now, we're grown adults. This is going to stay with the locker room for a while. I don't care what anybody says. I don't care if the season's over. I'm pretty sure their relationship is they're not the greatest right now. Kyle Anderson's still on contract for this upcoming season. He's on an expiring deal after this year. But I think Kyle Anderson does a lot of stuff on the court. I think he's a very solid piece. Do they look to trade him, or what do they do with that? They try to find a way to work that relationship out because, like I said, great example, Golden State, and their chemistry just wasn't there, and you can tell off the court and on the court, and you know, so that's another thing where I will look at too. But besides like this roster, losing Nas Reed is going to be a huge loss because Nas Reed comes off the bench, does a lot of big things, gets the momentum going, gets the bench unit rallying up, and losing him, that's going to be losing a lot of bench help and stuff like that. But I do like some pieces like a Nickeil Alexander-Walker, which was getting more playing time. Tyrion Prince definitely had a solid playoff. So if I'm them or if the Minnesota Timberwolves, I don't think they do too much. I think they keep the same team. I think they come out here with the same roster. Maybe they make a little offseason move if somehow they lose Nas Reed or something like that, try to replace him in a sense. But they're most likely to be coming out this roster. Their hope is most likely going to be like, we just didn't have Cat for a whole season. Let's see how this operates. My problem is with that, you have Cat running all around the perimeter because Rudy Gobert can't guard the perimeter on these other guards. So Cat's getting exposed on the defense, and it just doesn't make it look good. And if you do remember, the Minnesota Timberwolves were making a little run when Cat got injured. They were looking like a solid basketball team out here. So that's what we think. But the Minnesota Timberwolves like, yo, we gave up all these first-round picks for Rudy Gobert. We're going to keep trying to make this work no matter what. So that's how I just feel about the Minnesota Timberwolves. I do think they make another postseason run. This postseason, they just got matched up, but it's a better team. But the postseason before, they lost, but I feel like they won every single game, but they just couldn't close the game out because they were beating Memphis majority of these games and just couldn't close the game out. So I definitely expect a big stretch from Ant Edwards this upcoming season, and that's the Minnesota Timberwolves for you.
Yeah. I just want to bring up the Kyle Anderson thing because I completely forgot to bring that up, and that was a good point. I think if you talk to most Timberwolves fans, and they'll agree to the same type of thing that if you choose Rudy Gobert over Kyle Anderson, we're gonna have real problems here. Because of the fact that Kyle Anderson is as we said, a winning player, right? I mean, he does a lot of things right. And Kyle Anderson, no matter who you talk to or whatever, always been known as a guy that's a tough leader, a guy that just doesn't have much of a filter. And, as being grown and stuff like that, he took it obviously too far, right? Rudy Gobert felt the same way, but I don't think the relationship is 100% pieced back together. But at the same time, being a grown man also comes with, we're going to have to put things aside, especially when it comes to our careers, right? So if we're gonna play on the same team and we're gonna try and create a winning culture here and try to win a championship, I think you have to put it to the side, and I think we're gonna run it back for that exact reason. I think Kyle Anderson, Rudy Gobert, apologize, and not one of those like PR stunt apologies either, like some that seem real genuine. So with that, I think that'll be okay.
I just think just to jump in about that, I don't think I think they'll both be on the team next year. I don't really think it's that big of a deal what actually happened, but I feel like if they had to choose, then they would choose Gobert, and maybe I agree with you. I think Kyle Anderson maybe is a more conducive player to winning in his role than Rudy Gobert is in his. But I just feel like based on what you gave up to get Gobert, you're trying to resalvage his value. And I think that's kind of what next year is going to be about a lot. Because right now, people are labeling that, even though they still made the playoffs, which compared to a lot of Minnesota Timberwolves seasons, that's a success compared to most others. But at the same time, it's they still were seen as one of the biggest disappointments of the season, and saying it's the worst trade ever and all those sorts of things. So, Kyle Anderson, it's I'm sure he has a lot of value as a role player across the NBA. But at the same time, I think Rudy Gobert, right now in his role, he probably doesn't have as much value as you would think compared to a starting center that you can count on for a championship team. Cause that's what he really should be. Or he should be one of the last year was a top 5-6 center in the NBA. This year, you probably can't say that. So I think that's kind of where that comes in. But I think they'll both be on the team next year anyway. So I don't think that's just a hypothetical, but I don't think it would even come to that.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think in all reality, it's gonna come down to them squashing whatever they had. They're gonna come back. We're gonna play basketball, and we see a lot of the Rudy Gobert being the worst trade in NBA history, which I think is quite ridiculous in my opinion, because I feel like in the past 5 years we've seen 3 trades that are worse than the Rudy Gobert trade. So, and the main that what comes up to my mind is the Paul George trade. I think that was a bad trade, but hindsight is always 2020, and the same thing that happens with Rudy Gobert, right? So I don't think you can hold it too much, in my opinion, against any of these franchises because you're trying to make a winning move. Obviously, it didn't work to what your expectations were, and I don't want to play what ifs, but the injuries definitely suck.
So my question is, and this is to everybody or whoever wants to answer. You believe Kyle Anderson in that situation is not that serious?
I think
I was wondering that same exact
And
thing.
hold up. Before I let y'all talk real quick, right? And the reason why I say that we're all grown adults here. Anybody throws a punch at me, it's never going to be the same. That's just straight up. And these are grown men. And not only did he throw a punch, I understand it was a weak punch, but Kyle Anderson called him out on his name too. So that relationship, I don't think will ever be repaired. I think just because they have to work it out and stuff like that, I think that they're gonna have to figure a way out. But that relationship will never be repaired personally, and I think that can affect the team's chemistry a lot on the court.
yeah.
Let me go real quick and just like kind of address that. All I gotta say on that is like at the end of the day, this is their job, and it is kind of on them to be professional in that sense. And I think we're just gonna have to see how it plays out on the court. If it's never the same and they don't personally get along, but they can play well together, that's one thing. If it causes tension and chemistry issues and it starts to affect the team, then at that point, you still have all the way into the trade deadline to try and get this man off the roster. And I'm sure there's a lot of teams who would like him. As far as Rudy Gobert and him staying on the team, he has to stay. Just for the Timberwolves, like their image as a franchise, they cashed in everything to get this guy. And at that point, you have to do everything in your power to try and make that work. Because if you don't, they just look stupid. And I think any GM and any front office is going to have way too much pride to just try and get off of that this quickly. So he's probably going to have to stay. And even the fit with Cat, like, while it still isn't really optimal, I think they still owe it to Cat to at least give this a little bit more time. Because at the end of the day, Cat did only play 29 games last year. And then they went into a playoff series with the best team in the NBA. So at that point, I don't really think they were given a complete fair shot. And I have a good feeling Cat will be healthy next year. Because, I mean, if you look throughout his career and his games played, like he was an Iron Man early on. And then really during the pandemic, he missed a fair amount of games. But that was a little bit different circumstances. And normal type NBA seasons, he is usually ready and available. So I think they owe it to themselves as a franchise to at least try to figure it out throughout the first 50 games or so. And then if they go to there and it's like, hey, this isn't working out, then you can make a change. Because at the end of the day, we know Ant's going to be solid. He's a superstar player, and you got to capitalize on that. And whoever that ends up being with, we can see, and you can see how things shake out. But I don't really see what big move they're getting right now to become better. And if you're getting off of Cat or Gobert, at the end of the day, you still have Ant and the other one. And if you have two of those players, you should be a team that's trying to win. So you got to ask yourself, if you trade one of these guys, is what you're getting back helping you be better now? And if it's not, then why are you really doing that?
If we're talking about winning moves now, then in my opinion, the winning move, as we all pretty much said, Kyle Anderson is the better player in terms of his role on this team. So with that being said, we understand what they gave up for Gobert, and we understand how much that was. However, if you can move off of him and there's a way to salvage it in some sort, you already took your loss. There's no way to salvage it in any way because you're not winning a championship with Gobert, in my opinion. So with that being said, you use these 50 games to evaluate what you can get for Gobert. Like we all said, Kyle Anderson is better in his role. And with that, also on the back end, Walker Kessler looks to be the guy that is more superior at that position and giving the Timberwolves what they need more than Gobert is doing. So, yes, it's a business and you don't want to cut your losses so soon. And I understand Cat was hurt. But with that being said, it's clear that there's a sour taste within the team, within the locker room. Like Trent said, it wasn't so simple as just a common, team fight. Of course, people call each other out their name and stuff like that. But I vividly remember a video where it was Kyle Anderson in the tunnel, and he specifically said they need to make a decision this summer. They coddle him. He's too soft. he said a multitude of things that aren't at a personal level. It's at a basketball level. That's not something you just move past because, like you guys said, this is work. So when he's coming for the things for Rudy Gobert at a basketball level, of course he's calling him a bitch and all that other stuff. But in the tunnel, when he's specifically saying as a basketball player, you coddle him, he's soft and all these other things, that's something that Rudy Gobert has to change. If that doesn't change, it's still going to cause the same turmoil in the locker room that is already done, especially with a player like Kyle Anderson, who knows what winning basketball is, who's played under the best coach ever. He understands the little things that you have to do. And I think we all know that Rudy Gobert is not one of those guys that does those little things. So I find it hard pressed for them to just move past it. Now, unfortunately, you guys made a solid point in the fact that you gave up so much for Gobert. So in reality, Kyle Anderson is probably out of there more than likely if they decide to move off one of them, because they could also just say, hey, this is work. We're paying you millions. Figure it out. Do what you got to do. And all in the same breath, I think they're going to lose either Naz Reid or there was one other player that Naz Reid
Alexander Walker.
I was going to say Jalen Noel. That's what I was going to say. But Alexander Walker as well. They can't keep them all, so they're going to have to figure out who's more valuable in that regard. But at this point, I think this past season has showed us Ant has matured to the point where he's ready to take that next step and he's ready to, start to play winning basketball. So what the Timberwolves do in these next couple years are critical, not only for their future as a franchise, but their future with Anthony Edwards within the franchise.
Yeah, I agree. I think Jalen Noel is not going to be on the Timberwolves roster next season. About halfway through the season, there was reports saying that he doesn't want to be with Minnesota anymore. And if I'm Minnesota, I'm saying, sayonara, because if I'm being real, he didn't produce at the level we expected him to, and the minutes he got. There was
no jumper.
Exactly, Jalen no jumper. I mean, there was times where it was like he looked like the best player on the court, but it was so far like in between those times that he looked like the worst player in the NBA for multiple games in a row. Like it's like you can have a cool, game where you drop 20 on solid efficiency, but then you come out there and play the worst defense out of any team or any player on the court. And at the same time, you can't score a bucket. So, and he was the momentum stopper for Minnesota last year. So I think Jalen Noel goes, plays somewhere else, whether that's China or for the Pistons. I just honestly don't care as long as it's not with Minnesota. I think Naz Reid for sure is coming back to Minnesota. I know the money's a little bit tight, but in all actuality, Naz Reid is currently practicing with a lot of the guys in Minnesota at our practice facilities, and he's not under contract with us. Minnesota does have his bird rights, which is also helpful when it comes to free agency. So I think in all reality, Naz Reid comes back. I think he will take a hometown discount, or not hometown, but coming back to what he knows and loves and the guys he loves. I think he takes a little bit of a discount to come back and play, and I think he has an increased role. And I think he already does live in Minnesota, but I think his future role is going to make him absolutely adore Minnesota.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Naz Reid's definitely the priority, and I'm a guy who's been high on Jalen Noel in the past, but like you said, I mean, you know it even better than I did. Even though he looked promising towards the back end of last year, and he was a little bit more consistent at times, very inconsistent this year. His shooting was way worse this year. Definitely not a guy that you can rely on moving forward. The question I want to ask to you guys, and especially to you, Jelson, we haven't talked on it as much through this episode compared to other things, but McDaniels is going to be a very important part of this team going forward, and he is extension eligible this offseason. What do you foresee in terms of does he get extended this offseason, and if so, around how much do you think he's getting paid?
I think there is no doubt he gets extended this offseason. I would, it's not even like Anthony Edwards is the no doubt. Like, obviously, everybody knows Anthony Edwards is going to get extended. You have to extend him. But I would also say that to the same extent, Jaden McDaniels is the exact same way. You have to extend him. Naz Reid must have, but not a have to, if that makes any sense. Like, if you lose Jaden McDaniels at any point, or you lose Anthony Edwards at any point, it's crushing to this franchise. You lose Naz Reid, it's like, that sucks. He was a great player for us. but we move along, get other pieces. But I think Jaden definitely gets extended this offseason. And I think we're looking at anywhere between 25 and 28 a year.
I don't know if I feel that way.
Yeah, 25, 28 is a lot. Trill, I think you're muted.
Yeah, you are.
Oh shit. I was just gonna say with Jaden McDaniels, like I think of a contract similar to what Mikal Bridges got with the Suns. He brings the same kind of thing that Mikal brought to the Suns, and he's eligible for 5 years, I want to say. And I think that would be what you look for in terms of a contract with him. It was a 4-year, $90 million deal, but I just think that you lock up a all NBA type of defender, especially one that's on the wing, because those are hard to find in this league.
I would say a little less than that, but I don't know if you said 25, 28, Jelson.
I would argue 25 is the low end.
Over 4 years?
Yes. 25 to 28 per year.
I don't
over
think
4
I can
years.
disagree with that.
And
I don't
think
I can disagree with that.
I think
I don't know if
Yeah, that's a little higher than the Mikal deal.
Yeah.
like if he's asking for that much and it's like it's like this or bust, like I need, like this is the bottom line, then you probably give him that money. But I feel like I probably wouldn't start there with my offer, and maybe that could, some people feel disrespected when people do that, but I would start lower. I feel like 18 million a year. Is that?
That's
I don't know.
really low. I think
You
in my
feel like that's
opinion,
low?
I think that's extremely low. And as we're saying, some players feel disrespected. And I think for a player like him, especially in today's NBA, where wings are a necessity, especially great defending wings with the offensive upside potentially in the future, I think in reality, you could say he broke his hand, so you might lower some value there, and you say, let's start you off at 21.
I mean, that's still 7 times more what he's making right now, and I don't know. I feel like that's.
He's had to prove
I just can't
himself over the years.
Yeah, it's
I just don't know if I can give him 25 million right now. I think 18 is a good starting point. It probably would end up in negotiations being over 20, but I don't know if I think 25 to 28 is a bit too high personally.
I mean, if he just comes in and he takes the money that Mike Conley is making now, that's like a mid-20s contract. That pretty much is if Mike Conley's off the books around the time that extension kicks in, pretty much your replacement there. It's just then the future of the franchise's point guard position. You're going to have to find somebody really cheap, or you're going to have to find somebody really young.
Yeah.
Well, then at that point, you're forced. Yeah, I was going to say, then at that point, you're forced to trade Rudy Gobert or Cat, because Ant is getting that super max. So that would be 3 people with that. And then you would have Jaden McDaniels with just a regular max. They don't have enough money, especially because the new CBA affects them a lot in the sense that they're already close to the second apron, which that pretty much hinders them in terms of signing people. They're essentially only going to be able to fill their roster with either people that are minimum, or they're forced to let go one of their max players.
Yeah. I think, going back to the money about Jaden McDaniels, how, Gary, you said that you would say start at 18. I think if I'm Jaden McDaniels and I'm being offered much less than what DeAndre Hunter got, I feel like that's shade towards me. You know what I mean? I think if DeAndre Hunter is getting 22 and a half, I think Jaden McDaniels getting 25 is not a stretch. I know we talked about in the past how DeAndre Hunter is not quite worth his contract. But
I don't know. I just feel like I hate. I see what you mean. I just hate the argument where it's other people basing your value off what other people get, and this is a big thing.
That's how
even
market works.
Yeah,
I know, but but I think 18 million is, first of all, he probably would be at 20 million. Like I said, 20 million is probably what would be agreed upon. But if I'm giving him 18 million, even if I say, you know what, okay, 20 million, I don't know if he's that upset that he thinks he's worth more than 20 million, I don't know. I don't know. Given what you have with the team right now, I don't know if I'd like keep pushing that far to say that he's worth that much. Might seem absurd, and I know he's young, but I personally would not.
I think he's worth that much to them specifically, just because he's gonna have more leverage in that situation. If he just like up and leaves and says, "Yeah, I can make more money elsewhere," and goes elsewhere, then I mean, it's not like the Timberwolves are a free agent destination. Like they can't just replace that. And even Jacob said earlier, like that's a crushing blow to the franchise. Like they cannot afford to lose him. And so when it comes time to
who's
be on
going to
the
give him
bargaining
more
team,
though? Is my thing. Like who would give him 25?
there's a lot of
28 million?
a lot of teams that would overpay for a player like that.
Yeah.
Maybe they would. I don't think there's that many, at least that many good teams or quality teams. It's going to have to be like one of those bottom barrel teams, like a Jeremy Grant Pistons signing a couple years ago.
If I'm being 100% realistic with you, Gary, I just think you don't. I think you're undervaluing him as a player.
Yeah.
Like
I'm not undervaluing. I think he's probably one of their 5 most important players on the team right now.
He is their 3rd most important player on the team, behind Anthony Edwards and behind Karl-Anthony Towns. And it's like not even a question. And like as a person that watched every single game the last 2 years for the Timberwolves plus all their playoff games, like if you, as I was saying, and as Gabe brought up again, like you cannot lose him. You overpay him if he wants it. You
in the direction they're in though right now, I just don't know how much you can give him, because like even Steph said, like if you're giving him that much money, and I know like even Gabe said like Conley's going to be off the books then. Well, that's also if he leaves for one, because you probably are still going to give him something if you keep him. But if you have Anthony Edwards on contract, like on a supermax, and then you still have Gobert and you still have Towns, like something's going to have to happen. And you probably would think at that point, maybe McDaniels takes a step. He's better than Gobert, better than Towns and everything like that. There's potential there, but I just don't think that's the move right now. I would give him, start low at 20 million. I don't think he'd be, I don't know if he's that upset about getting 20 million a year, then I personally don't know what to say to him, because if I saw 20 million a year, man, come on, man.
You're not a top tier athlete.
Yeah. Listen,
bro, I'm just saying if I saw 20 million a year and I started off making 2 million a year or 1 million a year, and then the next year he's on like for like what, 3 million? Like that's a huge improvement. And by the next contract,
minimum, I'm cooking.
Hold on. Yo,
that's where he got drafted though. That was his starting contract.
Listen, bro. Let's just stop disrespecting this boy. Like, let's just stop. He deserves the money. Dude shooting 50% from the field, 40% from 3, averaging a block and a steal a game, best perimeter defender on the Minnesota Timberwolves team.
In the league.
Let's give him his bread.
No,
let's give him his money.
Bro, you gotta chill the fuck out.
No. In the league, and I will die on that hill.
Let Trent go ahead, Trent.
Listen. Wings don't grow in trees, man. I keep saying this over and over and over. What wins you championships? Wings. Look at the Denver Nuggets, man. They run out there of KCP, Bruce Brown, stuff like that. Like, you get those type of players, 2-way, 3-and-D players around your team. You get what I'm trying to get at? They help you win, bro. Look at the Phoenix Suns. They're going a different direction.
I was just going to say, I'll just end it on this, and then, or you can even go after me, Trent, because you were going to say something. But, like, I'm just saying that's what I see personally out of him. Like, we can revisit this in a year. If he's taking massive leaps and if he's worth that money and they do give him the extension and it's worth like 25, 28 million a year, then okay. But I just don't see it like to the same degree that you guys do.
Just pay the dude.
Pay him. And Garrett, I understand what you're trying to say in a way, because of, I mean, you don't want to overpay him, especially in the situation you're at currently, contract-wise, stuff like that. But I think, if I'm being real honest, you cut your losses with Rudy Gobert before you say, I'm not going to pay Jaden McDaniels.
I just think the value you got to resalvage for him. And while you can, he's still young enough.
You can't resalvage that.
Stop. You got to stop that. You can't say that you can't, because you
cannot.
can.
Everybody sees how garbage that dude is. You're not resalvaging.
He's garbage, and he's 4-time All-NBA and in a 3-time defensive player of the year.
You're not going to get back.
I'm saying this dude's still young enough right now. He's 30 years old. Okay,
He's garbage.
it's possible. It's possible that you could resalvage his value right now, but you know when you won't be able to? In probably about 2 years, when players, all those types of players we've seen over the years, whether it's DeAndre Jordan, whether it's Roy Hibbert, any player that's a similar mold that he's been at his best, at his apex, they all show a serious decline. So while you can give value for him right now, because right now he's less valuable than the guy he got traded for, that was probably the afterthought that he was traded for. He got traded for 4 players, and he was probably the worst player, and he got traded for like 7 picks.
And you're not getting that back.
Still not getting
my
that back.
point. You're not getting that back.
If you give, like, just for example, like what Garrett is trying to say is not Rudy Gobert specifically, but like, let's say you give 3 first-round picks for a player. The player comes. No. What I'm saying though is you give a 3 first-round picks for a player. He comes in, plays not great, and his current value is 1 first-round pick. You want him to come back and say, play well enough so we can get 2 first-round picks back for him.
That's still a loss.
I'm saying if you're traded for 7 picks and 4 players, okay, right now, if you traded him, I honestly don't know what you could get. If you revisited this 1 year later and his value rose, obviously you're not going to get 7 picks and 4 players. But you know what you could get? If he has a bounce back year to any extent similar to what he had, maybe he's be worth like 3 picks and 2 players. Because even at the time, last season, when we were talking about Rudy Gobert, he wasn't worth what he was traded for. Everyone said it was a bad trade in that sense. You're never going to get that value back for him because it was a dumb trade in itself. But you know what you can get? Enough to make it not as bad of a trade.
My final thoughts are, I don't think Rudy Gobert gets traded. And I do understand what Garrett's saying completely as a Timberwolves fan, because I have to. You know what I mean? So there's a situation where I hope that you can at some point recoup more assets, not more than what you traded, but more than what he's worth right now at some point. I don't think personally that it will happen, but there's always a chance because, as Garrett said, we don't know what the league is going to look like after this year, right? So it's a really tough situation with Rudy Gobert, obviously, and everybody has differing opinions on him, and it seems like you either love him or you hate him. There's no in between Rudy Gobert. And that's fine because there's some players like that. But I think overall, Rudy Gobert is one thing, but we need Anthony Edwards and Jaden McDaniels on this team for 5+ years to come.
Yeah, I mean, undoubtedly, Anthony Edwards and McDaniels, they're the future of this Timberwolves team, regardless of Cat, regardless of Gobert. In an ideal world, you lock up Anthony Edwards and you lock up McDaniels. Those guys are your core long after Cat is gone, long after Gobert is gone. And that's what the Timberwolves have to prioritize this offseason. Hopefully they make the right decisions around Cat and Gobert as well. Maybe you can bring back Naz Reid. But those 2 guys are your future, and that's what could give Timberwolves fans like yourself some hope moving forward that there could be some consistent success in Minnesota over the next few years and the remainder of this decade. But let us know down in the comments below if you do think Cat and or Rudy Gobert will indeed be traded this offseason, and we'll see you guys in the next one.